New Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hey everybody! One thing you can be sure of on the New Thought Media Network, on almost all the shows, that intro music, I'm always, whether it's my show or another show, I'm sitting there watching the intro and dancing to the music. And I hope you are too. My name is Tracy Brown, and this is Inclusive Church. New month, new show, new ideas. And I'm so glad that you have joined in today. And I am here coughing and all as I get over a cold. So what is the Inclusive Show as the Inclusive Church as a show? I want to spend a few minutes talking about the goals and the ideas and the concept of the show. And then for those of you who have not met me before or are not familiar with my work, I will spend a few minutes talking a little bit, not only about my background, but especially that part of my background which feeds into this show. So thanks for joining us. And please, you can do what Matthew James Preston Fields has done. Absolutely say hello in the chat. Tell us where you are watching from. And I can see that we have people watching on multiple streams, some on LinkedIn, some on Facebook, on New Thought Media, some on Facebook and at the Stained Glass Spirit page, and also on YouTube. So let us know who you are and where you are. And throughout the show, please add your comments or your questions simply by putting them in the comment section or in the chat, depending on which platform you are watching. And I'll bring in those questions and those comments periodically throughout our time together. So, Inclusive Church is not just about church. It really is about how can we be inclusive in our different forms of ministry. So I am not defining church as a building. I am defining church as a congregation of people, as a collection of people who are practicing spiritual principles in their lives individually and collectively. So we've seen this happen in so many other settings where a group of people will take a word that maybe has a negative connotation or has been positioned to have a negative connotation, and then they have reclaimed the word and redefined it to a certain extent. And with Inclusive Church, I'll tell you, I brainstormed with 6 different people at different times, trying to come up with a word different than church. So we did use a ministry and we did use a variety of words, but none of them were as all-encompassing as being able to say it's not just the building, it's the people. But if you are in a building, and that even with a focus ministry or a virtual ministry, you are in a building of sorts, and or if you, let's say that you do quote unquote church in a box, or you move from location to location for different events. So there are elements you have to consider when you are prepping, setting up, selecting that venue in order to be inclusive. So we didn't want to eliminate the buildings, but we also wanted to really focus on the people, no matter what kind of environment you are in, virtual or physical. So, inclusive church it is. And if you become a regular viewer, you'll notice that we talk about church in ways that may challenge some people. And we're not throwing out the traditional idea of church, but we are saying there are things you need to keep in mind, and there are things you need to do in terms of taking action in order to be inclusive. So, a little bit about Tracy Brown for those of you who are new to me. Today's show really is an overview, but after today, almost every show will feature me talking with and exploring the topic with a guest. But we wanted to do one show that was simply an introduction to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So many people know that this topic is very important to me personally as well as professionally. I have spent several decades working with leaders in corporations, associations, government agencies on how to be more inclusive and how to create environments where they can recruit, retain, and serve people from many, many, many different cultural groups. And I am also a licensed spiritual coach and practitioner in Science of Mind Centers for Spiritual Living. So, no surprise that at a certain point, I began to do work with churches and with spiritual communities um, around how to reach people that they wanted to reach but had not been successful reaching or retaining or including. And all of that work, all of the diversity and inclusion work with spiritual communities of many, many different belief systems is done under a banner called Stained Glass Spirit. The whole idea that there are communities, or we have the ability to create communities that are like stained glass spirit or stained glass windows, where there's so many different people, all who are different from each other in so many ways. But like in a stained glass window, where the leading holds all the pieces together, our spiritual beliefs and practices hold us all as people together to come as one without eliminating our individuality and our uniqueness, all for a common purpose. And so that work I had been doing for about 10 years when I captured some of the basic principles about why this was important work in the 21st century, and captured it in a book titled Stained Glass Spirit: Becoming a Spiritual Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. So the book came out, and it really does focus on understanding the why, and it really is directed to leaders, people who are not just ministers, but leaders, people who are on the board, people who are the team lead for different ministries inside your spiritual community. Because if they don't understand why we are talking about inclusion, and if they don't understand as leaders, they have a real responsibility to make sure that they have prepared themselves to interact with and to involve people who are different from themselves. Then, you could have a senior minister who says, inclusion is my jam. Inclusion is important. I want us to be radically inclusive. But if people throughout the spiritual community don't get it, then it's not going to work. Now, I hesitated there because it's not just getting it, it's understanding what, I don't know, and being willing to grow and learn some new ways to communicate, to resolve conflict, to create programs and services. It requires something new from all of us, because all of us change and grow when we have, or when we are in an environment where there are lots of different kinds of people. So the book Stained Glass Spirit was really about helping people understand why it's important, A, and B, what is the spiritual imperative? What is the spiritual imperative or the spiritual mandate that requires us to be more inclusive and to be to grow, so that we're comfortable and committed to being around and with people who are different from ourselves. So Stained Glass Spirit, the book, came out in 2019. So it's been a few years. And after the first 6 months, I would say that 85% of the questions that I get are questions not about why. It's questions of, okay, I get it, it's important, but how do I do it? What do I do next? Oh my goodness, it's scary to have conversations or to meet people. Like, I may make a mistake. I don't know. Like, I don't want to make it worse. And dealing with the why and the how is what inclusive church is about. So throughout most shows, we won't be talking about the theory or the hypothesis that having a spiritual community where there are lots of different kinds of people, we will not be talking about why that's important, in terms of educating. We'll talk about it's important and that's why we do these things. Or we understand the importance is A, B, and C. And that's what led our board to decide X, Y, and Z. But we won't be just talking about spending a whole show talking about what's the difference between political and spiritual. Or we won't spend a whole show talking about ways that you make people feel unintentionally unwelcome. We'll talk about, when you are getting feedback that you're unintentionally unwelcoming, what are 5 things you can do? What are some conversations you can have? What are some ways that you can actually talk about it with leaders in your community so that you can change things? Like, what are the prompts you can use at a board meeting? Or what are some resources that you and your staff or your volunteers who are doing your promotion and marketing, like, where can they go? And, here are some places to try to get you started. So that'll be the big difference between just Stained Glass Spirit as a concept and inclusive church. So this show will be covering conversations you can have, actions you can take, examples of what others are doing, which is why most shows I will be talking to 1 to 3 guests, and they will be sharing what they've actually done and what worked and what didn't work and why. So I just want to go back and repeat, because I've seen quite a few people jump in since I said it early. Even though it's inclusive church, we are not just going to be talking about the traditional church and the walls of the church and a physical building. We are going to be defining church as the venue and the people, and especially the people, because I don't know about you, but I know for me and millions of other people, one of the reminders that we got during the COVID pandemic was that the church was not in a building, or was not confined to being in a building. And we had to really take a breath and reframe. It's our people and the people we want to attract, and how do we get them to know each other, be with each other, share with each other, and grow and learn together. So inclusive church is not saying a church building. Inclusive church is not saying traditional or non-traditional, although I will be leaning heavily into New Thought and metaphysics and in contemporary forms. But with Stained Glass Spirit, we've done work with churches and church systems that would fall under the umbrella of the traditional Christian church. We've done some partnerships with mosques and with synagogues. And so while we're here on the New Thought Media Network, and most of our content will focus on that, you will get to experience me talking with people who are in other religious or spiritual environments, because guess what? We can learn from them as well. So that's just a little bit of an intro, and I'm going to share some specific info with you. But before I do that, I want to share this video with you. So I hope that 2 minutes or so just gave you some ideas to be thinking about. What are some of the topics and some of the ways that we can be providing you with tools you can use, actions you can take, conversations that you can have, and how to build up your courage, your confidence, or your competence in being able to talk about some of these issues and challenges, as many people call them. Tracy thinks of them as opportunities. What are our opportunities to expand our reach? What are our opportunities to share our authentic selves? What are our opportunities to learn about people who have cultural backgrounds or experiences that are different from my own? We live in such a complex and, I think, beautiful world, and most of us just seem to cling to our own experiences. So when we make the decision that as a spiritual community, we want to reach out and be home, the welcoming place, the opportunity to grow for people throughout our community. And if we're virtual, our community could be the entire globe. How do we do that? And how do we do that in an intentional and inspired way? So, those are the kinds of things we'll be talking about. I also wanted to share that video with you because so often, even now in 2024, I'm shocked how often when people are using the word diversity, they're only thinking about race. And even then, they're only thinking about conflicts between people who are Black and people who are white. And so we'll have some conversations about race and racism and race relations and how it impacts your spiritual community. But when we do that, we will be talking about people from many, many different ethnic groups, people who speak multiple languages, and how, while that is a reflection often of race or ethnicity, it is bigger than just focusing on challenges that may come up between Black and white. So you may have noticed in the video as well that there were, it's so funny, we could make a 30-minute video and maybe begin to reach the many different dimensions, but trying to keep it to 1.5 to 2 minutes, we picked a few visible ways that we want to be sure to integrate as we participate together in building an inclusive church. And so we will have some shows coming up that are specific about different disabilities and how to integrate people with disabilities into your community. Well, I really am looking forward to one of these shows where I know we're going to be talking about how basically all of us have some disability or will during our lifetime, that the majority of us will experience some physical, mental, or emotional disability, and why we can really use that in our spiritual communities to talk about the subject of people with disabilities. And then you also saw 2 or 3 references or reminders that when we look at sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, that our spiritual communities in the 21st century If there is a desire to reach people throughout the community, we need different skills, we need different programs, we need a lot of education, and we need more willingness than maybe we've ever had before to learn and to grow together. So, age, we'll do some stuff around the multi-generational society we live in and how that impacts our programming, our services, our music, our messages, all of that. So I hope you've been intrigued. The goal today is to just spend about 30 minutes sharing what is the Inclusive Church Show all about. And I'm going to end with some examples. The last chapter in the Stained Glass Spirit book began to move people into action. And the last section was actually entitled Being Intentionally Inclusive, so that it's intentional. You are choosing to take some actions. And in the last chapter, there's a list of things to begin to think about. On page 95, I wrote, being intentionally inclusive simply means you have clarity about the positive impact you want to have in our multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational world. And you live in conviction with that clarity. When this is true, every day you make choices that value diversity and choices that contribute to an inclusive church, inclusive community, or inclusive world. And when you do that, you are making a donation to the revelation of the truth of harmony, love, and peace. And so I give a list of 15 things for leaders to think about and ask which of these action items needs to be practiced by key members of your leadership team or your staff or your board. And the list is not meant to be complete or absolute. The list is meant to be a catalyst to your own thinking about ways you can be an effective, inspiring, and inclusive leaders. So here are 5 or 6 things that are on the list. And these are the kinds of things we'll be fleshing out during the Inclusive Church Show. You can easily explain the spiritual mandate for valuing diversity and being inclusive. You ensure the diversity of the membership is honored and reflected in programs, services, materials, and events. You value different perspectives and you're proactive in soliciting and including a multicultural perspective. Stop. I just want to comment there. This does not say a marginalized people's perspective or an oppressed people's perspective. You are, quote, intentional and proactive in soliciting, including a multicultural perspective. One of our early shows is going to go really into that and what the difference is. You proactively consider the diversity of key stakeholders when creating or reviewing programs, policies, and services. You recognize that the tools and services offered must be adapted to reflect the needs, expectations, and cultures of your membership. And I'm just going to choose 1 or 2 more. You consistently hold committees, work groups, and project teams accountable for demonstrating a commitment to valuing diversity. And you have created a personal inner circle or a specifically designated advisory committee to provide valuable guidance and trustworthy feedback about multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational topics. If I were to add one to the list today, I would add, you are always learning new information and integrating it into the way you show up. So that's the journey we're on together now as part of Inclusive Church, this weekly program hosted by the New Thought Media Network. We'll be live streaming at noon Mountain Time on Tuesdays. And if you are not able to watch live, all of the live stream locations will have the recording immediately available to you. So I hope that you will join me. I encourage you to put it on your calendar. And if you have specific topics you want us to focus on, or maybe in your spiritual community, maybe you've done something that very cool that has worked and you want to be a guest on the show, I would love to talk to you about that. So that's it for today. Just trying to give you about 30 minutes, and I'll look for you next week. Most shows will be more like 45 minutes, but we will definitely keep you under an hour. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am so delighted that you have joined me today, and I hope to see you again next Tuesday or on a future Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.